Hi, I'm Renoa. Together with me are Rain and Lenlen. Today we'll be discussing Chapter 2 of Digital Business Models by Bernd Wirtz. It has 5 subtopics. First, research streams of business models. Second, classification of business models. Third, integrated business models. Fourth, levels and goals of business models. And fifth, business models, value chain, core assets, and competencies. In the world of business, there are multiple companies in a certain industry. They offer the same products, same services, but they differ in a lot of ways, like quality, quantity, systems, and processes. It is a matter of who stands out more. Here, it seems obvious that business models have a special relevance to the competitiveness and success of companies. This chapter will provide the foundations of the business model concept in a more detailed manner. Let's start with research streams of business models. Throughout the time, the business model concept gradually developed from a long history. During its development, the concept was taken up by different streams of research and associated with different schools of thought. There are 3 different theoretical approaches, namely information technology, organizational theory, and organizational strategy. Information technology is the first approach that was established because in the technological concept, business models emerged from the research area of management information systems. Given that numerous companies are competing with each other, as early as 1975, Kongzel predicted that computerized business models would continue to gain importance. For sure it would because despite having the same products, their processes are different. Early on, Kongzel directed his work towards management goals and identified the business model as a management tool. The goals of business modeling were to create a business-compliant architecture and to reduce the cost of hard and software implementation. As years passed by, methods and tools such as ARIS and PROMET were developed which were suitable for process documentation, process analysis, and conceptualization. Since the mid-1990s, UML, a standardized object-oriented modeling language, has been used. Business modeling occurs as a 3-step process. First, the business objectives and available resources are determined by the CEO or the responsible unit managers. Second, the system developer drafts the structure and the business processes as well as the allocation of available resources, resulting in the business model as a simplified representation of the business processes. And third, the system developer creates an information system based on the business model. During the course of the technological revolution caused by the internet and the advent of e-business, the significance of the information technological view on business models expanded. However, it was not possible to directly transfer the traditional business concepts to the internet because of the competition and market conditions resulting in changes in the task of the business model. Business model is still to be seen as a preliminary conceptual stage, but has become more vital in the overall modeling process. It changed from the plan of producing a suitable information system to an integrated depiction of the business organization in support of the management. Moving on, at the beginning of 1990s, business model concept lost its implicit connection to information systems, resulting in focus change and development of 2 new research streams, one of which is organizational theory. In the early IT view, it can be used to support management decisions. It enables the understanding of how companies work. The functions of the business model were defined by Erickson and Penker. According to Erickson and Penker, there are 5 functions of the business model. First, to better understand the key mechanics of an existing business. Second, to act as a basis for improving the current business structure and operations. Third, to show the structure of an innovative business. Fourth, to experiment with a new business concept or to copy or study a concept used by a competitive company. And fifth, to identify outsourcing opportunities. With the Industrial Revolution in the middle of the 19th century, this concept became increasingly relevant for companies and may be regarded as a preliminary stage of modern management theory. Up to today, further development of organizational theory has produced many different schools and theories, wherein majority were classified in the area of sociology. Nowadays, organization theory centers its focus on achieving efficient results by means of organizational regulations. Through this, it becomes necessary to decide on the results one aims to achieve. The objectives were defined by the next theoretical approach. Hedman and Kalling highlighted the close connection between organizational theory and strategy. They found that strategy has its roots in organizational theory and listed both constructs as basic theoretical approaches of the business model concept. With that, we move to strategic management. It is the comprehensive description of entrepreneurial activity in aggregated form. According to Hamel, innovations in business modules constitute competitive advantages resulting from the inclusion of internal corporate view with competitive strategic components in the business model. Strategic approach is relatively a new discipline in business management research, but it has not developed linearly with organizational theories. As it became increasingly important in academia, the business model was expanded especially by strategic components. The works of various researchers continued to influence the business model concept. One of the most important representatives of the market-based view is Porter, particularly his 5 forces and his value chain model. In contrast, a resource-based view focuses on the individual company and its sustainable handling of resources. In summary, it can be concluded that the identified research streams provided different explanatory approaches and access points to business model management. It enables companies to depict the value creation logic. It also provided concepts and ideas on how a business could be implemented, given that it is in a world that continually evolves through time. After having outlined the research streams and related approaches, the next section uses this foundation to revive a classification of business models, which will be discussed by Rain.
Hi, good day. I'm Rain and welcome to this segment of our report about business model concept. This part may be a bit lengthy, but it will all be worth it as I will be discussing 3 insightful topics, namely development of the business model concept, business models, and criteria for the classification of business models, which all fall under the classification of business models topic. So, without further ado, let's get started. Before we get into the classifications, we must first know how business models are developed. How did business models came into existence exactly? Was it like how we human beings evolved? Well, kidding aside, at the start of all the analysis regarding business model concepts, so-called rudimentary models existed, and these specific types of models specialized in individual application scenarios only. You can say that it's very limited, hence the term individual application scenarios, and it's not very flexible to different types of situations. However, of course, we continue to progress. Today, a wide variation of business models which caters to multiple companies exists. It was mentioned by the previous topic how different opinions from different authors and such had been summarized into a very diverse understanding of what a business model is. We can see that process of the development in the timeline below. We can see that it all started as an unused term, business model, and it ended up being something so important for companies, with different approaches that came into play as the time progressed. We can clearly see how beneficial this condensation of ideas are, but when there is an advantage, disadvantages always follow. Well, in most cases, for this one, the scale of development resulted in different perspectives and multiple understandings of the concept in the early stages. Additionally, this caused different authors to have different approaches about business models. And because of this, an effort to create a synopsis of definitions was started. Authors came together to form multiple criteria. And these criteria are: components are listed, contexts are considered, different categories are made, and grouped existing business models from practice into categories or attempt to establish taxonomy. I know it's a handful, but don't worry and trust me. I'm here to give you a brief explanation of each author's contribution and take on business models. Firstly, Bigger's, sorry for the pronunciation, 8 Dimensions of a Business Model, which was established back in 2002. In this business model analysis, 8 contributions from different approaches were gathered and compared. From these 8 contributions, the authors have found out that the contents of these contributions overlap. And although it looks good because there are similarities in the structure of the models, it is actually a disadvantage because it is difficult to distinguish between them or those different type of contributions. And moreover, this will cause misunderstandings because there might be a lot of interpretations. And when implementing the model in action, there are also differences in the scope of each model, which creates more confusion. So in this slide, we can see the model of Bigger in the figure. And this model is actually a representation or an example of how similarities can also create confusion. So, like in life, not a lot of people who are similar get along very well. Some of them, it creates a very big confusion because, sometimes not all similarities are good. Some of them may complement the other person, but some of them may also clashes with the other person. Next, we move on to the Massman, I'm so sorry again for the pronunciation, and Wang's analysis way back 2003. According to them, business model literatures are divided into 2 categories: types and characteristics of business models and components of business models, and that these components are crucial in the success of an organization. From this claim, they analyzed the 7 contributions and extracted relevant components from it, in which they classified the approaches based on the relevant components are extracted. So, although their contribution is a bit short in the timeline, it's actually a very big contribution because they proved how components are very crucial in terms of the success of an organization, and of course, how components are supposed to be part of business models. So it's like a short visit, but it's a very worthwhile. Next, we move on to the Kruger and the other authors' classification. Their focus now shifts to the characteristics and components of business models, and their analysis goes like they have selected 3 approaches in the taxonomy of internet business models and further derived components into 3 approaches. As a result, they argued that the components may possibly link to the different taxonomies or classes. They used the generic linking approach to illustrate their analysis and transfer the results to the special context of the online news market. How about Batali and Jagliss from 2004? What have they found out about business models? Well, in order to further elaborate their claim, they took a more comprehensive approach. They read thorough to the literature and found out that it is categorized into 3 factors: confusing diversity, heterogeneity, and different angles of existing approaches. From their investigation, they have found out that no consistent frameworks are present in the analysis and research of business models, meaning everything is flexible and possible. Furthermore, they have found out that no approaches have been connected with each other. This is the model that the authors have made, and it depicts the 8 principal sections. So the main categories were concept or terminology, business model structures, and business model management process. In the concept or terminology category, it is further divided by definitions and scope. And in business model structure, it is divided into 4, which are forms and components, value system, actors and interaction, and innovation. Lastly, the business model management process category is divided into 5: design, implementation, operation, change and evolution, and performance and controlling. Here, we can see Wirtz's analysis of the research articles regarding business models. From the figure, we can say that first, it illustrates the research intensity regarding the individual subcategories, case studies, and complex empirical studies. To further elaborate, distribution between conceptual frameworks, or conceptual papers rather, which is 49%, and study-based research or basic empirical work, which is also 49%, are balanced. It creates a clear deficit and a high potential for research in the base of multivariate analysis. Second, it identified 4 essential foci with special research intensity, which are innovation, which is 26%, change and evolution, 18%, performance and controlling, 16%, and design with 10%. Third, innovation is the most important research field due to the globalization trends and growing competitiveness. It is highly important to understand how to become and remain innovative and successful with the company's business model. Fourth, increased research interest in performance and controlling of business models. New procedures are necessary to examine the profitability and sustainability. And it is also relevant because of the increasing challenge with the competitive advantage and continuing discussions, which is the responsibility for society, environment, and stakeholders. And lastly, business model designs that have been investigated intensively as a distinctive arrangement of the design process, as well as well-structured graphical visualizations, ontologies, and their communication within the company are essential for well-rounded decision-making. We are now going to move on to the last topic, which is the criteria for the classification of business models. And as a summary for all the business models we have discussed are the classifications. Particular overlaps are apparent, but the basic homogeneity or the same kind is not discernible. Here are the major points or results from the figures shown in the slide. First, the categories are only suitable to a limited extent. This means that only certain sections of the business model concept are considered, and relations or implications are not sufficiently taken into account. Second, component-oriented perspective is present in the majority. Third, extraction of relevant components is highly relevant. The following are components that are also relevant: strategy, material and immaterial resources, and network that influence the value of creation of a company. Another point to consider are the importance of customers is frequently mentioned. Another component is the marketing offering model, which offers the value proposition. The main aspect is the consideration of competitors. Revenue component is also mentioned. And the last component mentioned is the financial model. That's all for the classification of business models. On to you, Lenlen.
Hi, I am Lenlen and I will be introducing to you an overview of integrated business models, which includes the topics of integrated business model approach and partial business models. The application of the business model concept is always associated with a primary intention, and that primary intention is the development, implementation, and protection of a lasting, successful, and profitable corporate strategy. In order to fulfill this, it is necessary to get the analysis of a company's activities and the resulting effects. This ensures that relevant aspects of a business model are anticipated and integrated into the processes so that unnecessary sunk costs are prevented. The integrated business model concept reveals a conceptual and aggregated framework of the most important components, and those most important components constitute the partial business models. The combination of those different parts ensure a functional and integrated business model. This conceptual framework is important in order to show how a company creates value and how it can ensure its profitability. So, in order to derive the relevant components of a business model, the company should take into consideration both their internal aspects and environmental conditions. So, in order to get a comprehensive picture, they should look into the internal and external factors of the company. In order to identify the environmental conditions or the external factors, they can always refer to the aspects introduced by Porter, which is also known as the 5 forces model. Concerning internal factors, they can refer to the 3 comprehensive aspects by Afua. First, for the environmental conditions, they can use the 5 forces model, which was introduced by Porter. The 5 forces model includes 5 aspects which is needed to be considered, and these are rivalry within the industry, supplier power, customer power, potential new suppliers, and substitute goods. Next, concerning internal factors, many different influential variables can be identified. However, three comprehensive aspects have emerged, and those are positioning, activities, and resources of the company. First, the positioning of the company. It provides information about which market and customers are to be served and how revenues will be generated. In this setting, it is important to decide which possible strategies are suitable, what value is provided to the customers, and in which segment a company wants to position itself compared to its other competitors. The positioning of the company is closely related or connected to the second aspect, which is the activities of the company. In this context, the critical questions to be asked are which activities shall be performed and in what way and when in order to achieve, hold, and strengthen a profitable position in comparison to the main competitors. In turn, the activities of the company are strongly influenced by the third aspect, which is the resources of the company. The resources of the company includes core competencies and assets that must be taken into account to analyze the long-term success of the company. In some cases, further observation of business models on the level of strategic business areas is useful, especially if it's a conglomerate. A conglomerate is a multi-industry company, meaning it is a combination of multiple business entities in different industries that operates under one corporate group. One example of a conglomerate is Siemens. Siemens is a German multinational conglomerate corporation and the largest industrial manufacturing company in Europe. So, in the case of Siemens, they have a strategic business units of power and gas and mobility. Power and gas units are basically concerned with providing utilities and power generation, and they also touch within the oil and gas industry. On the other hand, the mobility units are basically concerned with offering efficient, safe, and environmentally friendly transport for passengers and goods by rail and road. These examples show the difference between strategic business units within a company, and so the business models must be adapted to these different conditions. And now let's move on to the partial business models. In principle, each integrated business model consists of several partial models. And these partial models are categorized into three components, namely strategic components, customer and demand components, and value creation components. And that's not all. Each components have three individual partial business models. I know it's a lot of models, but please bear with me. First on the list is the strategic components. Under strategic components are three partial models, namely strategy model, resource model, and network model. So these strategic partial models generate an operational scope for the other partial models and define which types of value creation are generally possible. In the strategy model, the top management defines medium and long-term goals and activities of a company in order to persist on the market. In this, it unites the business vision, mission, and goals. And it also determines the positioning and conducts situational analysis to serve as basis. In the resource model, it includes the core assets and core competencies as well as other elements relevant to value creation. Resource model are all relevant tangible and intangible input factors of the business model, physical and non-physical, and both internal and external resources are also included. The last one is the network model. The network model gives an overview of the value constellation partners in value creation and the connections between different business models. So, it is like an instrument of the top management to control and manage value distribution within a collaborative value creation. Basically, the network model focuses on the connections, relations, and collaborations within the value creation. The next component is the customer and demand components. The customer and demand components depict basic influence factors for the design and operation of the business model. It also describes the corporate environment and connects it to internal value creation by means of revenue. So, it means that it is like a link between the business strategy and its value generation. The customer and demand components also zero in to the customer needs and market situations. The data obtained from the market or the customers can also be used for the corporate strategy. Under the customer and demand components, we have three main partial models, namely market offer model, customer model, and revenue model. First, the market offer model. The market offer model is oriented along the market environment, and so it seeks to make use of available market opportunities. So in this model, it is about the competitors, the market structure, the market value it has to offer, and the products and services. And as a result, the company's value proposition is developed and shaped against the background of an analysis of competing business models. Next is a customer model. As the name suggests, it is about the customers. It includes all activities aimed at a successful customer relation. The major focus of this is the target group orientation and also the CRM or the customer relationship management. This is also the core interest concerning the selection and design of sales channels such as the wholesaler, retailers, in order to get a bigger market for the product. Customer orientation is also crucial regarding the setup of customer interfaces, which are the sole points of interaction between the company and the customer. Last is the revenue model. Actual revenue streams and the relevance to the business model are managed by the revenue model. It clarifies how and to what extent the value generated can be monetized for the company. So, the revenue model is responsible for the absorption of a portion of the added value generated from the production of goods and services. The last component is the value creation component, which comprises the internal value generation. So here, the focus is put on how and under which conditions the value can be generated by means of central value creation logic. Under the value creation component, we have three partial models, namely procurement model, value creation model, and finance model. So these partial models of value creation are influenced by the other components like the strategic components and the customer and demand components of the whole business model. First, the procurement model. The procurement model describes the structure and sources of the raw materials, goods, and services that are necessary for the production of value-added goods and services. So in this model, it is about procuring or resourcing raw materials, goods, and services. The securing of suitable resources to favorable conditions, respective market screenings, and information analysis are the basis for this value creation. Next is the value creation model. The value creation model gives an overview of the conversion process from inferior goods and services to better quality goods and services through internal processes. So in here, it converts the raw materials or other inferior goods and services to a better quality goods and services that is valued by the market or it is appealing to the market. This conversion is accomplished through performance and production factors that function as input and can be subdivided into planning and elemental components. Last is the finance model. The finance model combines two financial areas of the business model, and those two financial areas are financing of the business model and the cost structure of the business model. The financial model provides information about which financial resources are transferred to a business model and how the refinancing of corporate activities can be organized. It also shows sources of financing for the business model. Additionally, it enables an evaluation of the financial success of a business model, and it also allows to forecast the prospective financing and liquidity requirements. This figure is a summary of all the partial models of the integrated business model approach. As you can see, the strategic component is placed on top, which means that the partial models under the strategic component play a central, interdependent, and superior role within the integrated business model. Since these partial models, the strategy model, resources model, and network model, are increasingly concerned with one another as well as all other partial models. Moreover, each of the partial models, the strategy, resources, network, market offer, customer, revenue, procurement, value creation, and finance models are all interdependent from each other. This means that these single models cannot be observed separately or solely, but they need to be looked at holistically because it is the key in understanding the business models since they are interrelated and interconnected from one another. A holistic understanding of business models can only be achieved with an overview of interactions for all partial models as seen in this figure. The purpose of a business model is to accomplish long-term corporate goals such as high profitability or quality leadership. And so, the strategy model, resources model, and network model, all within the strategy components, affect the composition of value creation. The single models constitute a strategic framework and influence one another. In turn, the value creation model and the market offer model serve as a central partial model for value creation. On the left side, we can find the value creation components. The value creation model enforces a transformative process in which, after a development phase, products or services are generated from monetary input factors and their conversion into elementary production factors, such as raw materials and inferior goods and services. This process comprises the value generation part of the value creation. So, in order to obtain these elementary production factors, like the raw materials, the procurement model needs to be taken into account. The monetary transaction of purchasing and the transaction related to the flow of goods are moderated by means of the financial model, like coordinating price negotiations and payment terms. And thus, this completes the value creation components, the procurement model, finance model, and the value creation model. On the right side, we have the market offer model and the customer model. They are intended for planning of value capture that eventually appears in the revenue model. Offers are finally made to the customers and the transaction has already been made. The monetary revenue stream is transferred to the business model by the customers and completes the value creation phase of value capture. Through this interaction structure, The synergy of the single partial models within this business model is described on a general level, which then results in a basic general understanding of their interdependent and interrelated operations. Having provided the essential features of an integrated business model, the next section derives the different levels and goals of an integrated business model. Take it away, Rain.
Hi, nice to see you again. It's me, Rain, and this time I'll be discussing the levels and goals of business models. For this part, we will be discussing two subtopics: business model levels and objectives of the business model management. Now, what exactly is the basis of business models? What is its role in the company? Well, the basis of a business model is to describe the relevant value creation and the value proportion, which creates a framework and illustrates the structure. The relevant levels can be divided into industry, company, business units, and product levels. So in this figure, we can see the different business model levels. Again, they are the industry level, corporate level, business unit level, and product group or product level. Let us first start with the industry level. The industry level focuses on environmental conditions and external forces, and if the probability of consideration are included. This also falls under the concept of strategic management. It also focuses on analysis of the production of goods and services of different companies within the industry. And lastly, it also focuses on the corporate environment. In the corporate level, it focuses on corporate factors and determinants. Another possible degree of abstraction is found in the corporate level, and three essential factors, which are resources, activities, and positioning of the company, which also are the core competencies and resources for the foundation of the company. Moreover, it influences the configuration of the production system and significantly impacts success. It also provides information about which consumers or markets can be served and how revenues can be generated. For small companies, an overview of all activities can be achieved in a corporate view. However, for a large-scale corporation, it is too undifferentiated to ensure the management of the production of goods and services. Moving on to the business unit level, this unit level is responsible for the functioning of one or more business units or products. It is also important to take note that many various business models may exist within a corporation. Lastly, the product group or product level. In this level, different segments of the creation of goods and services are summarized in an integrated view. Also, all relevant partial models and processes for a product are illustrated here. And lastly, due to the different degrees of abstraction, the value creation and profitability of a company can be fully comprehended. This is the foundation of a sustainable management and the creation of a long-term competitive advantage through business models. We will now move on to the business model management and its objectives. The first objective is to assist companies in describing their business activity. So theories are further simplified for management interactions, processes, etc. And it also lets them achieve a higher abstraction for a business activity and supports better decision making. And lastly, this also is the foundation for further development of business models. Second, it is to reduction of complexity. This means that it allows a clear presentation of information on the company, which leads to a better basis for decision making within business model management in order to successfully operate the company. Third, to generate an increasing amount of information and key figures. So it should not only support the management in daily decision making, but of course it should also enable a long-term profit-based orientation. And it's important to take note that the manager should be able to fully understand the relationships within the company as well the processes and links to the corporate environment. So for this reason, building a holistic understanding is another goal of business model management in order to better identify potentials and evaluate risks more precisely. Next is to identify opportunities and risks. So in this context, the individual partial models are continuously examined. They assess them whether further efficiency advantage or synergy effects can be used to better serve customers or to optimize the production of goods and services. It also facilitates competition analysis and the identification of possible external value creation partners for the responsible business model managers. And lastly, to undertake the task of consistently evaluating the whole business model in order to identify advantages and disadvantages of its strategic orientation. Lastly, for the objective is to support companies in implementing the business models. So business model management can help to present an overview of the relevant aspect of the company's change process. So business model management can also ensure that all relevant aspects and partial models have been considered, which increases the probability of success of the company or an organization. And it also, all procedural activities and sub-goals are focused on the primal goal of securing sustainable competitive advantage, profitability, and the survival of the company.
And last but not the least, this chapter concludes with the presentation of core concepts of business models. So let's dive into the topics of value creation system, core assets and core competencies, and value chain. In order to understand the management of business model, it is vital to assume that the company's resources determine its success and development. The value creation system includes elements that are decisive and necessary for competitiveness of an enterprise. These elements include the business model, value chain, and the core assets and core competencies. This figure provides an overview of the value creation system or enterprises. Here we have the core assets, core competencies, and value chains that are needed to be taken into consideration. Core assets are basically all the assets that are used to create value, while core competencies are sustainable and transferable competencies as basis for competitive advantages. Both core assets and core competencies act as fundamental inputs to the value creation chain. Meanwhile, the value chain facilitates the structured presentation and analysis of the value flow activities in enterprises. In this discussion, we will primarily focus on core assets, core competencies, and the value chain. First up are the core assets and core competencies. Core assets and core competencies give companies a sustainable competitive advantage, which leads to the achievement of superior returns in the long term. If a company gains a sustainable competitive advantage, it usually means that they have a better, superior product and service offerings, which in turn lead to an enhanced demand position. If they have better, superior product and service offerings, it also means that the customer experience and customer satisfaction will also improve. And this will finally result in a market leadership position that is higher than any other competitors. The concept of competitive advantage allows the respective company or enterprise to create better service offers and to provide its services with higher value for the customer. Moreover, the concept of core assets and core competencies arise from the resource-based theory approach of strategic management. When we say resource-based, it is usually used to determine the strategic resources that a company or enterprises can use or benefit off from to achieve sustainable competitive advantage. Additionally, it is also used to explain differences in results between companies and to derive strategies for the creation of competitive advantages. It is mostly concerned with the assets and core assets, and it follows the fundamental premise of imperfect factor markets. When we say imperfect factor markets, these are characterized by having competition for market share, small number of buyers and sellers, and there is a high barriers to entry and exit. And there are also different products and services. Basically, as the word suggests, it is imperfect, not perfect. On the other hand, when we say perfect markets, these are just theoretical and it cannot exist in the real world. So, as such, all real-world markets are imperfect markets. When we say resource-based, it is usually used to determine the strategic resources that a company or enterprises can use or benefit off from to achieve sustainable competitive advantage. Additionally, it is also used to explain differences in results between companies and to derive strategies for the creation of competitive advantages. It is mostly concerned with the assets and core assets, and it follows the fundamental premise of imperfect factor markets. When we say imperfect factor markets, these are characterized by having competition for market share, small number of buyers and sellers, and there is a high barriers to entry and exit. And there are also different products and services. Basically, as the word suggests, it is imperfect, not perfect. On the other hand, when we say perfect markets, these are just theoretical and it cannot exist in the real world. So, as such, all real-world markets are imperfect markets. For the first part, let's define the meaning of assets and core assets. Assets are tangible and intangible resources that form the basis for the activities and the competitiveness of an enterprise. So it is a general term, and an example of this is financial resources and human resources. Meanwhile, core assets concern specific assets that are accumulated in-house or were at least refined and that have a special intrinsic value for a company's value creation process. They are relatively scarce and are difficult to imitate or substitute. Core assets form the basis for a lasting competitive advantage. So, core assets are more specific. Assets can only be classified as core assets if they are number 1, valuable to value creation, number 2, rarely available in the market, and number 3, not easy to imitate or to substitute. This is reminiscent of the VRIO framework. So, if an asset adheres to the VRIO framework, it is considered as core assets. Otherwise, they cannot create the potential for sustainable competitive advantage. Let's take employees as an example. Employees are considered to be assets and they are part of the human resources. The employees are essential for value creation since they are persons with the relevant know-how, skills, and competencies. Since they are number 1, essential for value creation, number 2, their knowledge and expertise is rarely available in the market, and number 3, their knowledge and expertise is also difficult to imitate. All of those adhere to the VRIO framework, and so that makes the employees core assets. In order for competitive advantage of core assets to be transferred into the superior services, that's where the competency-based perspective comes into play. Competency-based perspective has the underlying assumption that organizational skills and abilities allow smart combinations of assets and core assets, creating better and surpassing services that are different from those of competitors. For this reason, competencies allow to manage core assets in a way to achieve competitive advantage. And so, company competencies are therefore a coordination capacity that is based on the social interaction patterns, the knowledge, and the individual skills of the company's employees and its management. According to the management-oriented explanation of Prahalad and Hamel, core competencies are characterized by three features, namely, 1. Provide access to various business areas. 2. Are transferable to a multitude of products or services and/or customer groups. And lastly, 3. Form the basis for its core products or services. In order for competitive advantage of core assets to be transferred into the superior services, that's where the competency-based perspective comes into play. Competency-based perspective has the underlying assumption that organizational skills and abilities allow smart combinations of assets and core assets, creating better and surpassing services that are different from those of competitors. For this reason, competencies allow to manage core assets in a way to achieve competitive advantage. And so, company competencies are therefore a coordination capacity that is based on the social interaction patterns, the knowledge, and the individual skills of the company's employees and its management. Words once again define the meaning of competencies and core competencies. Competencies form the foundation for collective action and facilitate the service creation process, in which assets and core assets are combined into valuable services. Once again, competencies are the general term, while the core competencies, on the other hand, are a special form of competencies. They are relatively scarce and do not lend themselves to imitation or substitution by the competition. Core competencies make a significant contribution to the perceived customer benefits and provide companies with a lasting competitive advantage. And so, in order for competencies to become core competencies, they must adhere to the VRIO framework. So, these are some of the examples of core competencies found usually in the digital world. First, automatization and data processing competencies, which are highly important for the digital management. Second, content creation competency, which covers the ability to create successful content that satisfies user demand. Next is collaboration competency, since it usually involves collaboration among different companies or company units. Experience design competency, which delves into creating a satisfying user experience. Technology and programming competencies are needed to set up, maintain, and develop the relevant IT structure. Distinct information and service spending, as well as service development competencies. Both of them directly influence the service offer, which is designed to satisfy the user's demands. And finally, the customer-user relationship management. This is an important core competency since this requires the activities to attract and maintain the customers to the digital service or product, and to keep the growing customer base. In this figure, The core competency and core services are integrated into a diagram of a tree, and thus a tree system. The trunk of the tree and its major limbs are core services. The smaller branches are service segments, and the leaves are the final services. The actual source of sustainable competitive advantage lies in an effective, smart, and enduring combination of core assets and core competencies. So, in this tree system, it is based on its roots, the roots being the core competencies, which provides the nourishing basis for sustainable competitive advantage. Like a tree, the service system grows from its roots and branches out to its final digital services. To add, Prahalad and Hamel gave a situation wherein a company that possesses the core competency of producing electronic displays and the competency to manage their core assets in order to produce those electronic displays. By using its competency, the company could successfully do business with different products in different markets, such as those who make pocket calculators, smartwatches, smartphones, and other services. The resource-based perspective of core assets and core competencies are complemented with the dynamic capability view. The dynamic capability view explains the development of resources and competencies over time and reflect an organization's capability to build up, configure, integrate, and coordinate core assets and competencies. The core assets and core competencies are not static or rigid. They change over time in order to adapt to varying surrounding conditions. Since core assets and core competencies are dynamic, it demands regular reviews and evaluations in order to decide which of them need to be further developed or to be dismantled. These processes can be controlled by the management of the company through defining specific goals and strategies that support either an asset or competency-based development. In this figure, we can see the customer needs and requirements that should serve as a benchmark for the continuous review of the core asset and core competency profile. Given that the benchmark is the customer needs, demands, and requirements, the core assets and core competencies are to be evaluated, and if they produce a positive impact, the core assets and core competencies are to be further developed. However, if they produce a negative impact, they will be degraded or dismantled. When a company identifies that the core assets and core competencies need to be further developed, it requires a systematic analysis and management process, since this process or procedure plays a very important role in the formation of recommendation for action in order to ensure the company's future success. The first step for systematic analysis and management process is the core assets and core competencies that possess strategic importance for the organization need to be determined. In this first step, future scenarios may be analyzed to identify promising and potential core assets and core competencies in the future. So in this step, you can think one step ahead. An example of this would be the virtual reality. The virtual reality is assumed to become an important digital market trend, and so the IT platform, technology, and programming, all of the stuff related to creating virtual reality can become promising core assets and core competencies. The second step, the achieved hypothetical target state, is compared with the current core asset and core competency profile to identify relevant fields of action. In the next slide, we can see a figure that shows this step. Finally, the third step of the systematic analysis and management process is the results of the target and actual situation outcome are transferred to derive the respective course of action. So, a company may choose a course of action based on the results of the comparison. In the previous example, if the company sees that the topic about virtual reality is still significant and relevant, they may actively pursue and develop it. However, if they do not show strategic relevance anymore, they may decide to completely drop it. This figure presents an overview of the analytical processes and the strategic course of action. The course of action is based on the results of the comparison between the actual situation and the target profile. If core assets and core competencies show a high future significance but low current state, it should be quickly built up, intensifying investments and knowledge management. It will be worth it since in the future, there will be high returns. However, if the core assets and core competencies show low future significance but high current state, it should be dismantled and disinvested in order to prevent future losses. If specific core assets and core competencies have low future significance and low current state, it means that it becomes obsolete, and the company may outsource or further reduce that core assets and core competencies. And lastly, if core assets and core competencies show high future significance and still high current state, they should be maintained and upgraded by all means. The systemic analysis and management process provides a clear strategic course of action, and so the core assets and core competencies can be adjusted according to the company's requirements. Finally, the last topic for this discussion is about the value chain. In the development of a business model, it is primarily the individual value chain activities within the enterprise that are analyzed. This analysis focuses on the different physical and technological activities of an enterprise, and they are considered the building blocks of a product that is useful to the consumer. Finally, the last topic for this discussion is about the value chain. In the development of a business model, it is primarily the individual value chain activities within the enterprise that are analyzed. This analysis focuses on the different physical and technological activities of an enterprise, and they are considered the building blocks of a product that is useful to the consumer. Porter had introduced the concept of value chain analysis. Value chain analysis is an instrument for portraying the value generation of enterprises. In Porter's concept of the value chain analysis, the value chain serves to provide a functional structure for in-house activities in order to identify approaches to improve the quality of the products and processes. In this value chain, it represents the internal activities that the company or enterprises engage in when transforming inputs into outputs. The value chain consists of two activities. One is the primary activities, and number two is the support activities. Primary activities deal with the physical production and transfer of the product to the customer. The primary activities include inbound logistics, operations or production, outbound logistics, marketing and sales, and customer service. Meanwhile, support activities are infrastructure, human resource management, technological development, and procurement. To summarize, the value chain refers to the various business activities and processes involved in creating a product or performing a service. A value chain is divided into two, which are the primary activities and secondary activities. Primary activities are those that go directly into the creation of a product or the execution of a service, while the secondary activities help primary activities become more efficient and effectively creating a competitive advantage. Lastly, the value chain analysis is a means of evaluating each of the activities in a company's value chain to understand where opportunities for improvement lie. Conducting a value chain analysis prompts the company to consider how each step adds or subtracts value from the final product or service. This can help realize some form of competitive advantage, such as cost reduction and differentiation. Cost reduction refers to making each activity in the value chain more efficient and therefore less expensive. If the activities create value that exceeds the cost of conducting that activity, it generates a higher profit. On the other hand, differentiation refers to investing more time and resources into activities like research and development, design, or marketing that can help the product or service stand out.
That would be all for Chapter 2. Thank you.